Hi, I'm Dave Williams, CTO of Massdriver. I'm here with Cory O'Daniel, CEO of Massdriver. Today we're going to be talking about generative AI and its impacts on DevOps. Let's start with this. What's your overall outlook on the impact of AI on software development and operations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in AI. I think that the takes around it have been concerning, like people being worried about it taking our jobs or replacing software developers. I feel like we've had this panic numerous times over the past 20 years, from Adobe Dreamweaver all the way to AI today, right? Like everything's always going to make it easier for business folks to replace us, and I don't think that's the case. But I do think that it will have interesting applications in DevOps and cloud operations.
What do you think like the ideal role of AI on like a developer's day-to-day is?
You know, I don't necessarily think it is writing our code to get started. I think that is where we're seeing it a lot with the co-pilots and whatnot. But I think that is a very big goal, an interesting goal. But I think it's a lot harder than just generating a function, right? To be able to understand the domains of your business, to be able to understand the way that you've organized your code and understand the linear nature of your Git commits, right? And how the change history has been applied to get you to where it is. I think that it doesn't take into account a lot of that context, and instead it'll just generate you a nice little function. Like, that's fine. But the worried part there is if AI is doing that small function for you, if it's doing the guts of the programming, then you're going to start losing that knowledge. You're somebody who's just kind of reviewing the code. And I think that software developers are creative people. Like we say, it's a computer science program, but we like to create, we like to make value, right? And I don't think that we're a person or a type of people that would be happy simply reviewing code. And so I think that if you take that to the logical extreme where we get to the point where AI is going to write all of our code and we're just going to simply review it, you're not going to find a lot of people that want to review it. And even if they are reviewing it, I don't know that they're going to be able to understand what it does, right? So I think that's one of the places where we got to figure out, like, how does this enter our workflows? And it's funny, where I've seen it impact me the most in software development is giving me more time to write software. I actually use it a lot of times to edit my emails. I'll write a couple of bullet points, have it fill in the blanks for me, quickly edit it again with Grammarly and send it. Now I got more time to write software. So I'm actually using it for other things in my day-to-day besides software, so I can spend more time focusing and honing in on the features I need to build and the value that I can add to the business rather than hoping a computer can do it for me.
Do you think that's going to democratize software engineering jobs, where it lowers the barrier of communication between engineers?
Between engineers or between engineers and business people?
I mean, I think either way.
I think that we will probably start to see it more in no code. And I think that can be an interesting thing, right? Like, software development was originally something that was in the hands of the person doing the work, right? It was in the hands of people that were doing accounting or doing number crunching. And it's kind of become this specialty where a lot of times you might feel like the pencil in the hand of a business person, like doing the work that they're telling you to do. And I think that it can create a lot of leverage for business people to be able to generate and do more things in like a no code era. But somebody, like, that's code eventually, right? That's code that's going to run on a machine, whether it's in a programming language that we understand, or whether it's assembly, or whether it's just, ones and zeros. Somebody's going to have to troubleshoot that. And I think that's where the problems start to arise. If it's very easy for a business person to come in and use some AI to generate some software for them or solve a problem for them, when it breaks, now it's much harder to resolve that outage because no one understands what's happening. No one's been writing the code. No one's familiar with the 6 years of code base that's gone into getting the code where it is today. It's something that's been generated by a machine.
Yeah, I think we've highlighted some of the risks with kind of introducing AI to like a more mature product. Are there risks associated with like starting your project with AI?
I think it really depends on what the project is. Like, if you have a project where you're doing a lot with the customer's data, like, it might be very important to bring in AI very early to summarize or detect anomalies. But if you have a product that is not necessarily data intensive and you're just kind of sprinkling AI on top of it for getting the attention of VCs, I think that you might be actually underserving yourself and maybe putting in efforts where it's not necessary.
Yeah. Do you think, like, on that, do you think the idea of like putting a computer as like an expert in generating software like inherently risky? I think we've seen some studies come out now where AI can be very wrong, but it can be verbose enough to convince people that it's right, even when like we should have the technical expertise to know better. Like, how big a problem do you see that being if you're kind of starting in Gen AI today?
I think that's a big problem. So I actually did a webinar recently on online data migrations with Postgres, something that I'm deeply familiar with. My master's degree was focused on database systems. I've worked in database systems for quite a long time. And when I was working on this, I had an idea of like the outline of what I wanted to talk about to teach people kind of how to use different parts of Postgres to do online migrations. But I just didn't want to write all the copy around it. And so I was using the newer version of ChatGPT, and I would give it my bullet points. I'd give it the code snippets that it needed to do to like walk through the tutorial I'd put together, and it would just generate absolutely wrong information. And what was really interesting was it sounded right. And so I think that's the thing that is risky for us in operations and potentially even in software engineering is if we don't have deep familiarity with the system that we're using or the service that we're acting on, AI can be confidently wrong. And what was really interesting about what happened there is I just blatantly called out to ChatGPT that it was wrong. And then it apologized and it fixed it. I didn't tell it what was wrong. It knew what was wrong. It was able to go back and inspect what it had written and figure it out. And those times where I was just like, I wonder how far I can push this. So I just wouldn't read it and I'd say, you're wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And it would just continue to regenerate and try to fix its mistakes. And so for somebody who's been working with this technology for 12 years and in the relational database space for almost 2 decades, to work with a tool like this and see how it could have been convincingly wrong to others is a little bit scary.
Yeah, it feels a lot like indexing versus like comprehension. Like I can reproduce a Postgres textbook, but I have no clue what to use in which spot.
Exactly. And when it comes to troubleshooting and like how this affects operations engineers, like how will this impact DevOps and the operations of our systems? It's like that is, again, it's nuanced. I think a lot of our expertise is on the job training, and getting familiar with how a system works is very important, right? You might see a CPU sitting at 90% and think, wow, that's high. I see a CPU sitting at 90% and I think I pay for that CPU by the minute. I want it to be as close to 90% as possible, right? And so 90% CPU utilization on maybe a web server might be a big, like might be a red flag. 90% CPU utilization on a node that's been packing a bunch of services on Kubernetes might not be a big deal, right? And so the context of these metrics and telemetry that we're getting back from these systems really matters. And I think that you have to have an understanding of what these systems are and what they all are and how they function together to really understand how to troubleshoot. And I think that's something that basic AI models that are just trained on, what to do when the CPU's high. It's like, well, there's a lot of other context to this business that may mean that high CPU utilization isn't a big deal, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let me ask this question. Are there kind of broad differences in using a model made to replicate language versus like something that can replicate code in a similar way? Like, is there a fundamental difference between like narration and like the generation of code?
I think there is something that's fundamentally different, right? Like a lot of our code can kind of exist within the bounds of a function, right? I mean, there might be a couple of functions you tie together to do something, but let's say it's a sorting routine or it is some string modification routine. Like that is very rote and very easy for, I think, AI to generate. I think when we get to text, I'm more of a naysayer there than I am in code. Like I think that when you look at the way we create as humans, I think that there's experience and exposure. There is the text that you've been exposed to in your life. There's the education, there's the people, there's the experiences that you've been exposed to, trips, travel, etc. And then there is what you've learned, right? And I think that when you look at AI, it's able to learn everything. It's able to read all these texts, but it doesn't have any experiences whatsoever. Doesn't know what it's like to go on a trip. And so I personally think that when we get to generating stories and generating, whether it's books or movies, I think that we're going to get to some very, very boring stories if we're just regenerating Star Trek for the 400th time.
Yeah, totally. So what are some practical uses of AI that you're excited about?
Like I said earlier, a lot of the work outside of my engineering is a place I still use it. I use it to fine tune emails. I use it to kind of expand bullet points when I'm writing messages or even writing slides for talks. I find that being to be very beneficial. Even for some of the interviews that we've done for this channel, I've written questions and asked it to sort it in the best storytelling way. Right, that's something that I would harp over for an hour or two, trying to figure out the right order to put questions in. Now, when it comes to engineering, some places I think it's still beneficial is doing things like anomaly detection. I think that's fantastic. Maybe doing things like arbitrating API endpoints, right? Like this is something that we've gotten to the point of where it's very rote, it's very typed. Like we have API endpoints. They're typed interfaces. We have things like GraphQL to richly define them. We have things like OpenAPI in Swagger to kind of define REST interfaces. I think we should be focused on how we can more easily be coupling systems together and connecting systems together rather than people just kind of rewriting like how to bind to this API endpoint, whether it's Stripe or whether it's an AWS service. Like that's some of the more boring work I feel like we're doing in engineering. So I think that boring, tedious stuff is things that we can expect AI to do, but it's the rich work and it's the communication that I think is really what software engineering is. It's me talking to a business person trying to figure out how to take this idea of value and convert it into software that I think that AI is going to struggle with the most.
Yeah, that makes sense. So wrapping up, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Is this technology blockchain or is it relational databases? Do you think it's here to stay or do you think this is going to be flash in the pan?
Ooh, how do you feel about them comparing it to blockchain? I think that what's happened in the last 12 months has been pretty impressive, but that velocity is also scary, right? There's a lot of people that are throwing money at it. VCs went after it. They recoiled briefly. I think there is a vast amount of uncertainty as to where AGI is. So it's very hard to say. It's a leap forward from where we are. And there's some really interesting models that are out there that you can download, through Olama or Hugging Face that are fun to get quickly integrated in your apps to do some very interesting predictive or generative things. But I think that it's still way too early for us to really understand like what this is. And I think that a lot of the more impressive models that are out there are still, while they're open for use, they're still not truly open source, right? If you're not sharing the data with us and the algorithms that train these models, it's not truly open source. And so it's hard to understand like how powerful these things are, especially after the lobotomization process that a lot of them go through. So I don't know. It's somewhere between relational databases and blockchain to me. I'd say, damn, that's a hard one. I'd say long term, it's going to be relational databases, but we're sure as shit acting like it's blockchain right now.
Well, Cory, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to everybody being pissed off in the comments.